All right, I think we will get started on wrapping up. It's a great honor to be moderating this closing session where we talk about the future of open data, the future of this movement, inextricably intertwined, as we've seen in other panels and plenaries, with other equally important movements. But like I said at the outset, I think this one still has a life of its own. So I'm happy to actually allow every panel member to introduce themselves now in order. Charles?
My name is Charles Conte, Professor of Public Policy and Management at Brock University, and also direct a research think tank here in Niagara.
Hi, my name is Christine Hagyard with the Ontario's Open Government Office.
I'm Yuri Konga with Open Knowledge Canada and an associate of Open North, as well as executive director of the Go Open Data Association in Ontario.
Hi, I'm Connie McCutcheon, proud member of the Niagara community, work at Niagara Region, and I'm the MISA Ontario president.
I have a mic. Hello, I'm Mélanie Robert. I work at Treasury Board Secretariat in Ottawa, so the federal open government team.
And I'm Kevin Tour. I'm Managing Director of Canada's Open Data Exchange and also VP Strategic Initiatives for Communitech.
And I'm Paul Connor. I'll be moderating. I'm co-chair of the summit, and I work with Mary Wiley at Niagara Connects. So to kick things off, we have strung together whatever slide decks were presented, and we want the combined one, which starts with, do we have the combined one? Okay, well, we can do it in any order we like then. Okay, well, why don't we just start with that. Each of the panelists was invited to provide a slide deck as part of their opening statement, and so I guess we'll start with you, Kevin.
All right. So I might as well get to the next slide.
Yep.
I'm probably going to stir up a little bit of controversy here.
Go for it.
It's not uncommon. I've only got one slide, but.
Yeah. There we go.
That's it.
That's it. Uh-oh.
So should I leave now? So I think it's probably important that I put a little bit of context around this. So we've been involved with ODX, with the Open Data Exchange for over 3 years now. And we've learned a ton from that experience. And recall, for those of you who are part of or heard our panel this afternoon, ODX was really all about connecting the private sector to open data sources for the purposes of driving economic outcomes. So we were really focused on the private sector and building that connected tissue between the data providers and the data users. It's not intended to be at the expense of the civic or social good at all. It's just what we proposed or what we came together to do, because we saw tremendous opportunity for increasing amounts of open data that were being made available through open government and transparency initiatives. And we just said, in the hands of the right entrepreneurs, that's gold. And so we set out to do that sort of thing with a combination of private sector contribution and contribution from the federal government. Why I'm saying I'm kind of done with open data, the kinda is important, is because I still believe there's tremendous opportunity with open data. It's just, and it's part of the strategy we're taking going forward, is to treat open data as part of a larger puzzle. To treat open data as part of a data-driven initiative as opposed to just open data in itself. Because what we found, and we found this early on, especially when we went out to the large, more established companies and introduced them to the concept of open data and how they could potentially use it, what we were finding is that they were struggling with dealing with their own data and extracting value out of it. And for us to come along and say, now pile something else on top of that, was just untenable. Now the startups were a different deal, because in many cases they started building their businesses around either open data or whatever the case may be. And so through that journey, we found that this is what we need to do. Let's look at it from a wider perspective. We're not giving up on open data, but now it becomes an element of a larger picture, but then we can start thinking about other data sources. We can start talking about AI and machine learning, because obviously data is the fuel that drives all of that kind of innovation. And so we're really focused on driving purpose. If open data fits into that, that's great. If it doesn't, that's okay too. It's really about driving the data economy. It's about driving data-driven innovation. And I guarantee, Melanie, that we're going to continue to do open data work because we know it's important. It just has to be for the right purpose.
Thank you.
I
Melanie?
want to go just right after. So I want to start from what Kevin said. Kevin is always a step or two or three ahead. And so take from what he's saying, not that he's abandoning open data, but that he's in the future where open data is just one other type of data that is out there that people use. And I agree with that vision. For my case, as an open government official, I still need to focus on open data. That is my job. There are other people that work on data. But I want you to understand, so that you're not all discouraged, that it's as if for government officials that we just realize that we're, standing on a gold mine, but we're knee deep in mud. We have all this data. It's like some of it is clean, some of it is dirty, some of it is siloed or not. And we're like, whoa, we got to do something with it. And so there's this massive work that has to happen. And I think it's the same outside for private sector that is kind of realizing there's data out there. So we're all like in Klondike land, and it's really messy, but now is not the time to give up. And if I had remarks to give, and we'll talk about this, about what is the future and where we should take it from here, I think we have to mature. We have to kind of get the streets established in that Klondike city. We have to start getting the maps ahead. We have to get orderly. We have to talk about things that sound really boring, like standardization. We've got to talk about also literacy. We've got to help people understand what is this data thing, what is open data, how do you use it, how do you consume it, how do you get it out there. But we also have to plan our city, not just go at it haphazardly. And I think that's been the movement so far. So my goal, and I think a lot of us government officials that are in open government team, it's like we need to mature our teams while keeping the entrepreneurial spirit that got these teams to start. And it's also our open data portal started in 2012, and before this really kind of existed. And so we want to capture that wonderful spirit, but we have to get more organized and just get a higher level of maturity while not even knowing what is maturity, because there is no one else that can show us. And at the panel before, they talked about this open data barometer, Canada being #1. And I've said that to some of you after we broke the champagne and said yes, the second moment we had was like, shit, what? We're #1, but we're not that good. The portal's not that good. What does that mean? It means that there's not a lot of people that can teach us how to do this. We're going to have to figure it out, and we're going to have to figure it out fast. And I think this is what we need to get around. This is what we need to work together on.
Thank you. Connie, you're next, and your slides are queued, so I'll ask for that back when you're done.
This wasn't planned. Seriously wasn't planned, because this is, it's interesting that, what we started talking about, just data, right? So I'm an optimist and a dreamer, and I'm not giving up the fight, right? I'm not. And I really, really want to see a day where we don't talk about open data. It's just data, and it's a way of life. And I really want to see a day where we don't even have to use the term open government. Just that's the way government in Canada is.
Right.
So I just wanted to share some of these points that I ponder as an open data practitioner, right? And the things I ponder is, you know what? Through engagement and partnership, I think we can establish trust. We just got to get there. We can do that, can't we? Right? I think that our citizens are telling us that they don't trust government anymore, and yet we've made great strides in open government. There's this kind of weird, juxtaposition of that. The more we move forward in open government, it sounds like we have less trust. But I got to imagine that when we keep it up, it's going to eventually work out. I play a long game, right? And culture change. I didn't hear that said too many times at this conference, but I think we kind of got to get a lot better in this. And it's not just culture change within our organizations. It's within our politicians, but it's within our public. Let's get our public motivated. The last session we talked about it. Let's get our public to ask for this stuff. They are the ones that elect our politicians. They hold the power. How do we get it so that we can give the public the power to help us move forward? And my last thought, you're probably going, what is that? It's a pause sign. At some point in our 9-year journey, when do we think, maybe we got to just take a pause? Do we pause while we build a national data strategy? Do we pause while we build our community data strategies? And over the course of this conference, I kind of went, maybe a pause isn't necessary. Maybe we just need to collaborate more, because I've heard some really good progress on a lot of those things from some of you. So maybe it's pause, but collaborate while you're doing it and move ahead with the insight of others. So that's all I had.
Excuse me a second. Slides are a little out of order here, but we'll fix it right up for you. You're restarting now. Teamwork.
Thank you. So I'm going to start by congratulating the governments that are working so hard in the open government space. Federal, provincial, municipal, and also other organizations that are integral to our ecosystem, such as ODX, looking at the private sector, the economic development. The academic community is instrumental. So it's really important, and from a perspective of this conference, I want to send out kudos to you people, because the number of engaged discussions that I've been a part of and heard during this conference is absolutely phenomenal. So the important thing is we want to move forward, and let's figure out, and I'm hoping at the end of this panel we will have some items to move forward after the conference. So the term open owns the future, I stole that from a company. I asked their permission. They never said no, so I'm still using it. So the reality is that I think that, like Connie, and I said this a couple of years ago, that there will come a time when we don't have to talk about open, because it'll be the modus operandi. It's just the way, data will be available. Government will work in an open fashion based on the principles, and we won't have to discuss that anymore. So, okay, I'm losing part of the slide. Anyway, so I tend to, as a number of the folks on stage here know, that I am a firm believer in the local to global. That we're all on this earth and we all need to be global citizens. But a lot of the work that moves towards kind of the global environment is based on what we do locally and the degree of collaboration that we work together. So coming together to address our collective needs, and in Canada, this is a big bugaboo I've had for like as long as I can remember, and that's all about the fact that when they talk about Service Canada, Service Ontario, Service Municipal, they're all thinking of citizens and residents as their domain, as opposed to an integrated approach. There's one citizen. We're all paying the taxes at the various levels, but they're treating us differently from a service provision point of view. It's not integrated. So we need to kind of move away from this level of government as opposed to this is government that's serving Canada. Open ecosystems. I think it's important to realize that, we are in an ecosystem. Everything relates to everything. And where we want to get to is that everyone understands and everybody contributes. So it's a positive thing. We recognize that there are challenges and issues. Give it the opportunity for inclusion and allow everyone to contribute. And here's another bugaboo, the interjurisdictional multi-stakeholder collaboration across Canada. So I've already noted on a number of times, and I think it's actually been mentioned during the conference, around the fact that there's a great working group, the federal and provincial and territorial working group, but it's missing some components. It's missing municipal government. It's missing civil society. And if we're really going to make this ecosystem work, we have to be inclusive. We can't have parts of it missing when we're trying to move forward collectively. And what are we striving for? I mean, the ecosystem outcomes we want is community well-being, the health, the economic, the environmental, societal. All of those things are what we're really striving for. That's the bottom line. And I think we always need to kind of look back on that context as that's where we're going. Open Commons. It's a place where we can come together. Open decisions. I'm a big advocate of opening up the decision-making process so that citizens, residents, actually know the process a government goes through on any particular topic. It knows at what point it can contribute to that discussion or that decision-making process. But that's very opaque in so many ways, and I'm not talking about open government and open data per se, because there's a lot of engagement there. But there's a lot of government departments that just don't do that, and the open engagement is really important. The part of the slide down the bottom, there's an organization that focuses on engagement, and they have a variety of stages. And the last one is empowering. So from the point of view of decision making, the interesting things I have to tell you. If you go to a lot of, well, not a lot, but I've certainly seen some government websites where that fifth one is not shown. They don't want any part of citizens being empowered, okay? That's not the way I did a talk once on open government, and the first question I had from council after, yeah, I get this open government thing, but how do I control it? So I answered, well, you control it for 4 years, and then once every 4 years, it's totally out of your control, right? But so open by design, and this was mentioned, I've heard it mentioned a couple of times, we have to embed open in all of the processes that we look at, because we're in the area of providing services and making decisions and legislation and all of that. And if we don't, embrace kind of the idea of open by design, then we're going to have problems in arriving at the optimum solution. I'm not saying there won't be, some ways of getting there, but maybe not the optimum one. So the culture needs to change, and I think Connie had said that I haven't heard culture change, right? Well, that's because everybody, I think, is getting tired of talking about it. We actually need to figure out how to make it move beyond where we currently are. So an example is open, integrated, and interoperable. This particular illustration started from a framework document that I came up with in 1994, right? And so this has just been webified a little bit, but the point is that it's taking us way too long to get to where we need to be, and open by design. So when you're starting something new, think about all of the elements that should be aligned with that. So that's just one example, and then I'll go back to kind of the opening statement around open owns the future. I think very important for all of us, in this community to look at the fact that open has so much opportunity. The other thing I want to just state is that all of the things that we're doing, we have to think about what's the end product? We need to be open with a purpose. Sorry. So just around that open with a purpose, I want to just comment on the fact that we had a recent panel on data standards, and the action item coming out of there was we need a secretariat to coordinate standards design and development in Canada, right? So there's an actionable item. Two panels ago, it was about building an open government movement, and there was agreement on the need for a clearinghouse of information and activities and things like event dates, etc. So I just found out that between that session and now, they created that clearinghouse, right? It's a clearinghouse wiki. So we can move quickly if we want to, and it's an amazing, amazing thing that we have here, big opportunity. So thank you for that.
We got to watch where the slides are, the order, that is to say.
It's going to be an adventure.
It's going to be an adventure.
Wait, and one of these stops it. Which one is this one? Okay.
Yeah, you got to go back, back, back.
Back.
Yeah. Zoom, zoom, zoom.
All this for one slide.
There we
Oh,
go.
there we go. Okay, so this, no, forward. So part of going later in the panel, a really good panel, a lot of what you said is here. When I was thinking about what to say, and I had two words came up, purposeful and persistent. And so this, for me, I think you've heard a lot at the conference, including just here on this very panel, about the terms publish with purpose, open with purpose. And so for me, when I think what's going forward, what's the future for open data, it is that need to be much more purposeful in our language, purposeful in our asks, in our descriptions, in our explanations to all about what open means and what why we're doing open. And I think what's happened for us is up till now, at least here in Ontario, the narrative and the language that we've been using is more open for open's sake, open by default, not going away, still our guiding principle, but open for transparencies, for accountability. These are fantastic. Again, these are staying, but these are very lofty, in a lot of cases abstract, philosophical type terms. And for me, I think our future is going to be much more in the purpose, very similar to what Kevin was saying, what Yuri's saying. Very clear. If I'd had time to think of it, I would have added problem solving on here. So open no longer being the end, open a means to the end. The end is the problem we're trying to solve in language that resonates with the community, and open is the solution to that. And that switches for us our intent. So it's no longer about trying to explain open for transparency, particularly to the people that are sitting on the data. It's about explaining to them this problem, this solution that your community has, that you have as a government with a mandate. Here's how open helps solve it. And so also in a language, it wouldn't be talking necessarily about open access or open science. We're talking about reducing the cost of textbooks or reducing the cost of tuition or increasing the knowledge available to teachers. So it's a shift, and it's a shift in the focus and a shift in the language. This is one area that I think is going to be the future for open data for us. And then the second one is just being persistent. So don't give up. Keep going for it. I think we've made phenomenal strides. People say 9 years, but 9 years was, if you're using the landmark being Obama and his announcement of the Open Data Directive was kind of when or the Open Government, when it hit the world stage for the first time. That's when we first heard about it. There was no Open Government Action Plan. There was no International Open Data Charter. There were no open government areas or open data portals. I mean, that was, we first heard of this term. And so to go from there to where we are today, I think is phenomenal. It took decades for the culture that we fight all the time to build up. And most of, it's 2013, 2014, so it's really only been 4 or 5 years. So I think we've done phenomenal progress. Yes, we have a lot more to go, but I'm looking forward to going there, and I think it's going to be exciting. And so purposeful and persistent. Those are my two takeaways.
But Charles doesn't have any slides, right? No, he does. Oh, he does? I didn't receive any slides. I didn't get them. I'm sorry.
You were supposed to send them to Paul. You said you were.
Uh-oh. I am so sorry.
Okay, I just learned that the slide I sent to colleagues did not show up. So basically what I'll do is just speak to a few issues or themes that emerge as I listen to the conversation over the past couple of days. Now, basically, I enter the conversation from the standpoint of someone who, for the past 12, 15 years, have been looking at the theme of regional economic reinvention. Essentially, how cities, how regions are going through this massive seismic transformation in their economies in the face of global economic restructuring. And part of that transformation or reinvention has been kind of building local platforms of knowledge generation, dissemination, and mobilization with partnership between the university, private sector, as a matter of fact, partnership amongst the university, private sector, local EDOs, and of course, the social enterprise group. So that constellation of actors coming together, building a shared space to reimagine the future and to build conduits for knowledge generation and dissemination and utilization has been the core part of my investigation. And the central theme that emerged out of all of this is that the next frontier of open data is basically to reimagine the very institutions of federalism and to reimagine the place of the local in a multi-level governance system. In fact, the slide I sent, I call it open data governance, and the operative word in that title is governance, to understand the architecture or the machinery of our government and to make it one of governance. 2 dimensions. Vertically, we need to understand how we can build iterative and interactive flows of information from the federal to the provincial down to the local to build a synchronized system. Right now we have patchwork and islands of open data initiatives until we can actually step back and realign our institutions to be an integrated service delivery system. Our desires, our passions, our visions are well ahead of our institution. The second dimension is to make the transformation from government to governance. By government, it's a bureaucratic syndrome in which, in fact, you have sort of the public authority holding the information and other benevolent sharing the information with Canadians. Governance is to break down the boundaries of government and to reimagine the very concept of policy leadership as citizens being co-producers of public value. When you shift to the psyche of governance, you begin to understand that, in fact, the notion of open data is redundant. It is a necessity. It's a prerequisite to leveraging the ingenuity of Canadians to work together to imagine our economic, our social, and our ecological future. So again, what I suggest is to rethink our machinery vertically in terms of intergovernmental relations, but also horizontally how we imagine the role of non-state actors in public policy governance. So I will say our vision, our enthusiasm, our conversation is ahead of our institution, and we need to rethink our institution as a next critical step in this initiative. Thank you.
I am so glad we're recording this. Thank you. Well, absolutely. No, we're going to be publishing everything we can from this conference. Stay tuned. Audio, you name it. So my next task for this panel is to, we arrived at a couple of prearranged questions that each member of the panel will have an opportunity to answer. I think question 1 we foreshadowed quite a bit already, which is how do we improve the collaboration amongst all the open ecosystem stakeholders? I mean, people have been talking secretariat, clearinghouse, and Charles, like the reimagining and fusing. I believe that's a word we could apply to what you're talking about. Our conception of our institutions at every level. But I'd like to give each person the opportunity, starting with you, Charles, if I may.
I think the one term that's been used a few times is the ecosystem approach, and I think we need to leverage and operationalize that term, what it means. So once again, the ecosystem approach moves past, sort of thinking about this one-way flow of information to a more iterative, dialogical flow in which you build platforms that are about co-management, co-creation of the information. So I would say leverage, conceptualize, and operationalize a concept of ecosystem, what it means. And that would be maybe the beginning of building that infrastructure around really co-managing and co-governing with citizens, social enterprises, private sector. It's really at the frontier of a new imagination of what government or governance means. And I think we talked a lot about ecosystem. I went to a few sessions, and I think that is becoming sort of the central theme, the thread that is weaving the fabric or the tapestry of a conversation. If we can own that, if we can operationalize it, I think we have something to start from.
Okay. Christine?
I'm fascinated by the talking. I mean, I would love that. That definitely the ecosystem and going forward. And I think it plays in. I haven't on this panel, but I talk lots about working openly. I think if we could get that concept, yes. I think it's we need to start with ourselves too. Because right now we still have a lot of work to do within government, just breaking down our own internal silos and thinking about, particularly in the data context, you don't own that data, that's not your data, and that let's share, let's do the collaborative, let's do the co-creation, let's do that within and like model for ourselves what we are also looking. I think dog fooding is one of the terms, if I'm using it correct. And so getting us to do that, if we can do that, I know it's culture change. But if we can get ourselves to do that, just for one example, even using our own open data internally, in making it, I'd love to make it mandatory, as in if you're going to be using this, if you're going to be doing this, sourcing it from one, all of that work, creating, if this is what we're saying, we're talking up here, we're saying being lofty, we want to be open, we want to do co-creation, we want to do, be part of this ecosystem, and so start with ourselves and then push it out and hope that those practices, that it can just become part of our culture and become the norm. I just don't know how. So I would love suggestions and everything how, but definitely love the vision and want to go that way.
Awesome. Yuri?
So while you're doing it internally,
Okay.
I think we need to help governments, those within government, those within the outside of government, as a community to assist. Oh, are you kidding me? Goodbye. I don't know who out in the audience did that, but that wasn't funny. No, I think it's important that we look at it from an ecosystem point of view and together, us as a community, and moving the agenda forward. So the trials and tribulations that government has, whichever level that happens to be, is something that we need to help them with, okay, we collectively. So if you work in municipal government, there's nothing that says that you can't make suggestions to the federal government as to something that might help their open government program or the province or what have you. And from a collaborative point of view, I think it's imperative that we have more collaboration among all levels of government and also the broader community, which includes stakeholders like civil society and others that have specific interests that are very important to moving the agenda forward and building the business case for why it's important, such as the work that Kevin does with ODX. So that's some of my thoughts.
So I don't know if you guys have been watching, at least me up here. When Charles spoke, I had that breakdown of some established mental models in my head. I had a bit of a pause moment, right? Because I'm like going, wow. It sounds to me that the best way for us to do this is to focus on governance for the benefit of our citizens, right? And break down all our jurisdictional walls, right? But how do we ever get there? And I'm an optimist, so I believe that's possible. So taking the simplest theory on how to move forward, I'm thinking we continue to talk. I think when we collaborate, we heard some good examples at this conference of how there is collaboration between jurisdictions going on. We've got to get to where the citizen doesn't care if it's municipal, provincial, or federal, right? So how do we work together, right, through the bodies of each other, right, to get rid of those very institutions that I think are preventing us from really moving forward.
So I'm still moved by what Charles said. It feels, for me, it feels that, you know, we're on this ship and it's like super foggy and we're like in the storm, and then suddenly Charles just showed us exactly where we're going, and I'm like, yes! And I had this hunch, and I think that's why I'm so passionate about this open government stuff, that what we were trying to do was really not just open data or open government, but sort of that, but it wasn't that clear. And I think what he's talking about and what we're talking about is really, like, it's a new era of civilization. It sounds really big, but I think this is where we're at. I think with digital, with open, with the ability to connect people, with artificial intelligence coming, civilization is going to change radically. And so our governance and our government institutions have to change around it. Okay, so that said, this is way, way far. I'm still on my boat. And he's just told me, now just operationalize it. And I'm thinking, this is really big, but I think what we can do is focus on those areas that we know well and start getting to work. And so I'm in government, I have a platform, I have infrastructure. So now that I know a little bit more where we're going, I think it's all on us to see what needs to be done in our area and start establishing that maturity and those systems and those infrastructure and those governance structure to get us to there. And I think we shouldn't shy away from doing some very practical, concrete things like setting up a wiki that's going to allow us to contribute better, or having a GC Collab page, or cranking out some data sets that are going to help some businesses do really cool things that eventually is going to pay off. So we shouldn't shy away from that operationalization. There needs to be people that are operationalizing by hammering some nails and doing some stuff like that. It's just on us to do what we can to advance towards that vision.
Not surprisingly, I'm going to answer the question from the demand to the user's side. And in my experience, there's no better way to create a strong collaboration than to have a common purpose. And I think what we've lacked is that common purpose. And again, now this is from my perspective of how can the public or the private sector use this. And we just, I mean, I've had the benefit to work with a number of companies for the last 5 to 7 years, and I've heard from them what the challenges are. And I'm still amazed at how sometimes we can sit around a table and not realize the challenges that each other's facing in terms of making a collaboration work. So there's really no rocket science to this. It's really, sometimes it's about putting the users and the providers at the same table and talking about a common purpose. And I think there's a variety of ways that we can achieve those sorts of things. The kinds of things that come to mind for me is things like, you know, well, instead of an open data conference, what about a users conference where you make sure that you get a good representation of the user community? It doesn't have to be just the private sector. It can be those that are using it. It can be from internal government, or it can be from external to government, and just have the conversation. And then that helps you define what the framework needs to be in order to enable that collaboration. Because I fear without that purpose or that common goal or those ideas of how we're going to use it, we're going to create blanket policies and we're going to create blanket solutions to unknown problems. And that's not going to get us anywhere. And so let's start focusing on defining what the problems are and working together to solve those problems.
Wow. That was terrific. Thank you all very much. And let me pay you the ultimate compliment here, all of you, that on that journey and when you reach your destination, I'm totally stealing all of this for the clean tech sector too. Because we've stood in need of a community of practice for a long time. There's 13 different kinds of clean tech, and they all have their own little groups, and they're not talking. So now to the heavy question posed by another member of our panel, but for everyone to answer, and we'll go back in the other direction. Sorry. What is the biggest threat facing the open data and open gov movement right now? Kevin?
So again, I don't want to speak to the open gov, but I will speak to the open data. And it's really no different than how I just answered it. I think the biggest threat is not having a purpose for it to be existing. And unless something's changed in government, and there's a whole lot more people here that understand government better than I do, but I don't think the purpose of, the willingness to create, keep funding initiatives that is there for the sole purpose of making data available is a sustainable model. And that's what I've pleasantly come to appreciate over the 3 or 4 years that I've been attending these conferences, is that shift to the conversation where how do we create purpose around this? How do we make this data useful? And again, I don't think it matters who uses it, whether it's internal or external to government, but there needs to be a model of sustainability wrapped around that. And without that model of sustainability, and of course there's probably many different models of that, then it will disappear. And specifically from the business side of things, you can appreciate that they don't want to build a business that uses a resource that at any given day could disappear. So if we don't provide the confidence that it's going to continue on and be sustainable, we can't really expect the private sector to latch onto it and use it, because they're just not going to build a business on a scarce resource.
So for me, of course, open data fits within the open government movement and initiative, and open government is about increased transparency, accountability, and participation. And I feel there's a lot of efforts that are being exerted by public service officials and civil society and all of that, and very little recognition that things are starting to happen, and very little recognition from the Canadian public that this is something important that they want their tax to actually pay for. And we're not very good at explaining what is it achieving, and we actually are not, we didn't even start from a problem. We just started from, let's just build it. So we have to very quickly get way better at telling our story, because at some point people will stop actually wanting to push for this. For the politicians doing this, when you expose things, when you make things more transparent, the first things that journalists find is the dirt. So at the beginning, it's just negative. It starts being negative, and later on does it start to pay. And I said that at the last panel, but we're only as good as our weakest links. So we can have all kinds of government officials trying their best, and if there's one of them that does this nasty thing, or one politician, then suddenly it's like nothing is worth it. And so I think for senior public servants that make the decisions, and for politicians, like they have to see the benefits of this and see it quickly, and it's on us to explain why we need it, why the businesses need it, why civil society needs it, why this transparency, participation, and accountability thing is a real deal. And at a broader level, I bring it with me, I sleep with this, it's called Is Democracy Dying? From The Atlantic. And there was another one like that, Is Democracy Dead? From Foreign Policy a few months ago. This is even worse than we think, right? I have the luxury of going to international summits and meeting with countries that are not like Canada. It's not as good there. And so there is this bigger movement that's happening in the world right now, where a lot of countries are turning back against democracy, and against institutions as we see them, and against transparency, and they're electing people that actually don't believe in transparency and accountability. They're just going to do what they want, and that's the way it should be. So there's that bigger threat that is happening, and we have to be very careful, I think, when we criticize. I think civil society should call us out when we're not doing this well, but when we criticize our institution, we have to remember that there are bigger threats. There are people that want us to have no institution, and for the bad reasons. So that's the threat I wanted to talk about.
Building on what you said, the threat I was thinking is that our public stops caring, and we don't build up within our youth a desire to care in the future. And what can happen is that government becomes irrelevant. And being an optimist, it really hurts to say that. But I do think that that's a possibility. But you know what? I think it's our jobs to make sure that that doesn't happen. The collective us.
So I'm thinking around open governments and open data, and I did a strategic plan once for a municipality around open open government, and they wanted to, explain it in a certain way, and I challenged them, take that out to the sidewalk outside of your city hall, okay, and ask anyone on the street, and I'm willing to bet $1,000, 10 out of 10 people will not know what the hell you're talking about, okay? So I think one of the challenges that we have is we've been very bad at actually coming up with the business case that illustrates where there's a positive impact for you as an individual, your family, your neighborhood, the broader community, the city, the province, Canada as a nation. I just don't think we've been very good at communicating, and quite frankly, if open government is only going to be associated when the media speaks about the bad things that happen, we're going to have a real problem sustaining it. There is so much positive that can happen, but we really need to have a solid business case, show all of the good news stories, and communicate it well, because we're not very good at the communication part of it right now to the general citizens.
I have my own.
Oh, you got your own?
I do.
Get in the
Okay. Okay, so my threat, I'm going to focus on open data, but I'll also say, even as I say it, I'm not worried about it. So I think the threat is similar, fatigue and open data itself. We were all the rage a few years ago, about 5 years ago. It was like open data was all the rage. Everybody, we were the cool, like, new area. Everyone wanted to work for open data. We still are the cool area. Don't worry, even teams here. Yeah. I'm just saying, there's a lot of fads, a lot of buzzwords. So it's open data. Oh, it's blockchain. It's artificial intelligence. And so if I was an artificial intelligence shop right now, I'd be getting all sorts of funding. My team would be huge. I'd be invited all over the place. The room would be packed. But they're going to be in the same place that we are in, 4 or 5 years, where it's, so this cycle. So if in terms of the threat is you get passed by, open data's passé, nobody wants to talk and come to it. The reason I say I'm not worried about it, because although the open data brand, I do think that does need to change. I do think that the purpose has to come in, and that we need to change our narrative. But data's not going anywhere. You can't have, as was said, artificial intelligence, blockchain, digital. One of the things I put out, a digital strategy is really just a data strategy. The surveillance state, I know there's all sorts of things, but I mean, the data is our future, and data is just going to explode and grow. And so they might not be calling it open data, they might call it something else, but there is just going to be increased exponential demand for, you think the demanding open now, it's going to go through the roof in terms of algorithms, artificial intelligence, you've got the GDPR privacy, demands for consumer protection, so open data might go away or might become faded or might become this quaint thing we did 10 years ago. But no, we're still from a brand. But I think we're just going to be busier than ever going forward. So, okay.
Just to echo that, I'll start on a hopeful note, saying that it is a conversation that will not go away. When I listen to colleagues and I listen to the passion they bring, the clarity of vision they bring, I listened to the presentation yesterday, initiatives across municipalities, it's a conversation that is here to stay, and we are in the very early phase of that trajectory, right? But there are certain challenges and threats along the way. I've talked about certain pathologies, so we can say the organizational pathology of departmental silos would be one major threat. The institutional pathology of fragmentation across levels of government is a major threat. The bureaucratic pathology of the walls between the state and society and the economy would be another threat. The cultural pathology of mass illiteracy around issues of open data and accessing, engaging that information. What we have, in fact, the underlying platform that is informing this conversation about open is a new public governance, which is around expanding the boundaries of the state, bringing in citizens as co-producers of value. But the trouble is, what we have, even before the open data conversation, was that the new public governance was able to bring in citizens who were educated, privileged, powerful, well-organized, such that you have exclusionary inclusion. There were those who were marginalized along lines of class, race, and the like. And we've seen a replication of those marginalization within the open data conversation. What do we mean by co-producers? Who can access a conversation? Who can be part of a platform? who would have the competencies to really engage and have your voice heard, right? And so we need to overcome those schisms as well. And finally, we live in the age of hyperconnectivity, issues around security. Mechanisms and guarantees to make sure that our health information, our energy information, and other policy information may not end up in Beijing or Moscow or some other place. How do we build architecture of protection around this massive hyperconnectivity and openness, right? We need to deal with that as well. So to temper enthusiasm with some reality around major global threats in the age of hyperconnectivity. Canada's socioeconomic destiny is bound to the apron strings of China and Moscow and others who may seek to penetrate the system. We cannot be naive, so enthusiastic as to be naive. So how do we build those walls of protection as well? Will be a major threat.
Thank you. Thank you all. This is awesome. Now, I'm going to go on when we started and say we have about 15 minutes left. And so I'm going to ask for a briefer answer to the last question, which I think will be possible, so that we can leave about 5 or 7 minutes for the audience to ask a few questions. And the question is, what's your top priority in a new open data action plan for all of Canada? And I'm going to start with Charles and bring it back home here.
I think given the degree of illiteracy, and so what we have is sort of almost functional exclusion of those who cannot participate in that conversation, I think we need a proactive, aggressive outreach towards public education and building competencies. When I listened to Dino's presentation during lunchtime, I was deeply encouraged by it. Again, one of the panelists suggested we're just in the early phase of this conversation. I think to be more proactive would be to tackle our schools, right? Elementary and high school, and make sure they have the language that we don't have, the competencies that we don't have. Because what we're doing right now is just laying the foundation of the architecture for them to come in and actually practice open data governance, right? They will realize a dream. Right now, it's really a vision. It's the early phase. So I would say a major investment is to really incorporate this conversation into our curriculum and get the next generation ready to really reap the harvest of what you guys are doing here. Right?
You're here.
And I have to follow that. What was it? My question was for which?
Top priority for open data action plan for all of Canada.
Oh, an
So
action
number
plan.
one priority.
So if this could be Christine's action plan, like if I could say what I wanted, this is just
Yes.
been dream. I would like all of us, all jurisdictions across Canada, municipal, provincial, and federal, can we please just release our financials down to the penny? It's very practical, very one thing, but I mean, that's a lot of ways what it's all about. So that would be my, if I could, and I had the authority and the power to do it, it would be our national priority. We would be releasing it so that at the end of this time next year, we could all be meeting and we would have all Canadian government financial data open, standardized, down to the penny.
Amen. Yuri?
Okay, so this conference had a lot of themes associated with collaboration. And I think it's seriously important that we have a consolidated ecosystem of collaboration among all of the appropriate stakeholders. And that, if we have these internal issues within the, I'm going to say the senior levels of government, more so than the municipal government, then we'll have to still figure out what that forum is so we can all be talking about it at the same time. Because without a collective, kind of ecosystem approach to addressing the challenges that we have collectively, we're just not going to move very far. And we need some tools, like Derek just created in the room next to us here, we need the tools to facilitate knowing where to go, where to find the information, and be able to jump in and out of conversations as you have time to be able to do that. So collaboration is going to be the key. We talk a lot about it, but we don't do it very well. It's time to do it very well.
So I get the pleasure of following Yuri when it's the same word that I wrote down, was collaboration, which happens to be the theme of the conference, right? It's, that old, the power of many minds together, right? I think we have to keep the dialogue going, work together. And the existing action plan laid out, I think, a lot of really good stuff that we have to make sure that we've finished before we proceed to the next things.
I think if I had to stick with one, I would stick with the way I said it at the beginning, which is, I think we have, what I would be, and I think what I will be focusing on, is really raising the level of maturity of this thing. So making sure that we capture this wonderful, collaborative, organic work into structured things. Like, this is going to be a thing. We have to up our game. And so, like, very specifically, like if we're talking about literacy, like let's not each actually come up with our literacy curricula. Like, let's start to have platforms where we can exchange and build off of each other. If we're going to publish with purpose, we're going to have to figure out systems so that we understand the need. We're going to have feedback mechanism. We're going to have discoverability, single source, that type of stuff, reporting on who uses the data. Like, let's just start to iron out the structures that we need to get to a maturity level that this thing should be.
I think, pardon me, for me, it's to stop giving things like artificial intelligence and machine learning and open data lives of their own, to treat them like enablers, like they really are, focus on solving real problems, and I believe if you do that, collaboration will happen.
Excellent. And I think we have a few minutes for questions from the floor. Nathan has the mic over there if anyone wants to raise their hand and ask of anybody on this panel anything to do with the future.
Hello, everyone. Surprise, surprise, it's me. I guess the question that comes to mind for me is when I'm wrestling with a bunch right now, and I want to put it to you guys in terms of concrete next steps. The OGP summit is May. So what are some concrete things we can do for May, collectively as an ecosystem, as you guys have put it? That's something very concrete, it's very tangible, it's right around the corner, it's a big opportunity. What can we do together in the next 6 months? I think it's 6 months to summit. No pressure, Melanie.
I'm not going to answer this myself. I think the question is to others, but I agree with the question in that not everyone might be able to attend the summit, but it's a moment where all eyes will be on Canada, all eyes would be on open data and open government. So how do you use that to have your reforms actually come out so that you can push the next 6 months, and so, or you get visibility? It's once in a lifetime. We're not going to have another global open government summit in the short term. So, yeah, I encourage you to think about that too.
I mean, that's a great question, very practical, very immediate next steps. In my slide, in fact, I have social considerations, i.e. social governance considerations and technical considerations. And I had the privilege of attending a session where they talked about standardizing, metadata, right? To be able to have platforms from which we can actually speak the same language, reference the same information, and have information speak with each other or to each other. So I think in terms of immediate next steps, maybe to build that national conversation around how can we, in fact, systematize or standardize mechanisms for data processing or storage. That could be one very practical, very immediate, right? As we build the architecture for this nationwide movement, if you will.
I think from my perspective, I'm looking at OGP, international. I think that part of what we need to do between now and when the world comes to visit us is to have an open community action plan, like our own plan, not just the federal government plan. Because there's a lot of, if we're going to move forward, we have to move forward together. And if we want to show the world how well it can be carried out, how well open can work, then that's up to us as a community, not a single level of government, and not 2 levels of government, and not 3 levels of government. It's all of government. It's all of, the economic aspects of it, the socioeconomic aspects of it. It's the community at large, which includes all of us, despite what our individual efforts might be. So you've started it, okay? We're going to build a community collectively, all right, that we can all contribute and jump in and out as we want. And we've got to do it quickly, because Melanie doesn't have a lot of time, right?
I couldn't agree more in that the other part of the threats to democracy is that we may be feeling that we're not that hot and we're disorganized and we don't know where we're going, but the rest of the world actually thinks we're leading this thing. And so there's a part of it that we have to show them that, yes, it's working. It's not perfect, but we're getting there, and we believe in that thing. So I totally agree on that. We owe this to have the world keep faith.
Kevin, did you want to say? Okay. Fair enough.
Hi, I had a similar question, and actually it's a little bit more precise. It's not a question of what, it's a question of how, specifically how. I know about the OGP, really interested in seeing Canada kind of show itself off as a leader in the space, but there are members in the community who might be interested in participating. I've recently found out about GC Collab, so that's a useful kind of mechanism to try and provide some feedback. But this thing is coming in 6 months. As a developer, 6 months is not a lot of time to do anything. So I guess specifically, how can people, and not just me as someone who's not from government, but we talk about cross-jurisdictional government collaboration. Where is that avenue for collaboration going to happen right now?
Okay, I think there's 2 answers to your question. The first is more technical, like where can I find information about this and where can I collaborate? So on the open.canada.ca site, you have, there's an email you can subscribe to which will allow you to be informed. Very soon we're going to have a summit website that's going to be separate, so you can find out all the information about the summit. And at one point there's going to, well, I'll go into the what exactly. There's also always, and Derek is there, the GC Collab, which is open to you if you want to get involved into specific discussions. Now, exactly what will happen at the summit is that there are some roundtables that will be co-created. We'll be opening up a call for proposal, and so you in the room that know what open data or open government needs, that know where the conversation should go, that did something amazing and you want to share it with the rest of the world, or if you're struggling with a really big challenge that is just, making you not be able to get to the next step, it's on you to create this panel and propose a panel, and ideally it would be an international panel. Some of you are connected with other people from around the world, but if you've got a great idea, you could still reach out to the team and say, I have this issue, and we could help you find other jurisdictions maybe that have this issue, and then you can try to create a panel, a workshop, so that we discuss the issue and bring it further. It's also a moment where we want to maybe make commitments, so you can try to push something so that a few of us, jurisdiction, countries, cities, people, commit to something for the future. It's also a moment to announce some things, share some tools for the rest of the world. And those of you that are public servants or politicians or that are working as part of NGOs, might be a good moment to time an announcement as well, because there's going to be a lot of media there. And so there's going to be spots for media to pick up on your story. And we need those stories because that's the wind beneath our wing in terms of getting the attention that we deserve. So.
I think, Eugene, just a quick point that I think what's important is for us as a community to be strategic about where we're going. And the reality is Rome wasn't built in a day, which means that what would be most important is to have a strategic plan for us together as a community as to where we want to go. not be worried about what the hell we can achieve within 6 months. You know, from an outcome point of view, I would say the planning part of it would illustrate globally what Canada is all about. Okay?
The one concept that comes to mind to answer your question is multi-level governance. You know, Melanie, Christine, and other colleagues, and right down to the local level, it's multi-level governance. It's different from intergovernmental relations, because that is contractual, it is static, it is legalistic. Multi-level governance is an interactive, iterative, fluid, adaptive platform of ongoing collaboration. Multi-level governance will be the mechanism, the conduit, the vehicle to get us there. Active federal leadership, bringing the provinces and local systems on board. But again, we didn't say multi-level government. Governance, breaking down the boundaries of public and private, respecting the ingenuity of the private sector. They are not evil people. They are Canadians. They have their own skill set. And breaking that cultural sort of barrier of that jaundiced view of the private sector. Bring them in. Of course, you have mechanisms around, you know, social corporate responsibility and the like. But bring in the social enterprise, bring in the private sector, because it is governance. So I would say it is multi-level governance, vertically and horizontally. If we can build that mechanism, that conduit, that, in my view, would be the how to get there.
I'll be super quick. And I love all the discussion and everything. I also do like the practical, the output, the thing. I'm taking from Hillary's opening remarks where she's like, transformation, yes, we need to do massive transformation, but let's remember it starts with a really small step. And so we might not, I would like to think let's use that as a landmark, that 6 months from now, I don't care how small. I mean, let's release one data set that's federated amongst all three, or one standard, or let's do the governance, you know, and even if it's a tiny little anything, that one step forward, and to be able, and maybe it's not grand enough to, you know, to have a panel on an international stage or something, but just to be able to say, and we did it, and like, woohoo, and so I think it would be fantastic if we, especially coming out of this conference, we said, yeah, and set ourselves that goal to be that one small step.
I think that's our commitment, to keep the dialogue so that we make that one small step.
Yuri will not let us
Right?
forget it.
He's not going to. So we need to work with all levels, right? And try to do one small step.
One small step.
Okay, I've got one small step for you. Okay. The challenge, I've been to all 3 of the International Open Data Conferences, and I've been pushing, I've entered the request that Charles made about getting this into the K-12 and creating pathways into post-sec. And nothing's happened. They had one session down in Buenos Aires. It was a great session. And what I learned there is that in Paraguay, which is way down below in the PISA scores, over 3 years, they've mobilized 10,000 students across 100 schools, and they've used the open contract data from the budget, so that speaks to Christine's thing, and they found out what happened to the money for their lunch money and for school infrastructure. Same thing in Brazil, where they went out and they said, well, what happened to the money to build our schools? And we need to be connecting our students to some, and learn from what's happening in these developing countries where they're using the open contract, open data, and the budgets. They're doing it already. And we need to bring that into our communities. And that, Charles, I think is where you come in, and do that through research, but not just the research, but also through the OpenCon community. This is an open source, open research community, and they're keen and they're connected, they're global, and they've done some amazing work. And they were not connected with the International Open Data Day in Buenos Aires. They should have been. So that's what we need to look at. In 2020, in Nairobi, Kenya, they need to be doing something that engages the students, not sitting on panels, but actually doing change. And that's where I would challenge you to see about how to engage the students in moving beyond the hackathon, where they're actually having an impact, like in Paraguay, and building on that. Not just having them come to present what they've done on panel discussions.
Thank you. I think,
Actually, sorry, I just thought of something, so it doesn't happen very often. The other thing that I think it would be good to align with the summit is the whole work that's being done around the Smart Cities Challenge. Because there are a number of finalists that I have to have their proposals in by March, I believe, and they're already looking to demonstrate some certain things as part of that process. And I have the pleasure of serving on an advisory board for the Waterloo region, which was selected as a finalist in the $50 million category. And it's all about improving youth health and wellness, and it's a recognition that if you serve youth at the front, then they will become good citizens, fruitful citizens, happy citizens as they go out through their career and into their community. And what I really like about the Smart Cities Challenge things, and surprise, surprise, is they were forced to think about what is the problem that you want to solve, and how are you going to use data and technology as a part to do that. And I know all of them are looking, and we saw a presentation from Montreal today about that. So the question being is maybe we should appeal to some of the finalists to say, what have you done, what are you doing, and how is open data in particular working towards the development of those goals, and how does that change the face of government as well?
thank you. And I think with everyone's permission, time being what it is, we'll draw this to a close and then draw the summit to a close. So I want to thank you, Charles, Christine, Yuri, Connie, Melanie, and Kevin for actually helping me sit through an entire panel without running from room to room with USB keys and slides. Thank you all very much.
I don't know if there is going to be a thank you, but I think two people that really need a big thank you, Mary and Paul. Like, this was I don't know if everybody knows, but Mary, like, the amount of work that goes into hosting one of these conferences, to pulling this off, to bringing this all together is phenomenal. It's just incredible, and you guys did an amazing job. This was a fantastic conference and summit, and I think, oh, and there's more, sorry. Thank you. The entire team, yes, I don't know all of your names individually. It was Mary and Paul that I dealt with most of the time, and that's just me. I know they were also dealing with everybody else and lots of panels. So I think you guys deserve a fantastic, your whole team, round of applause for this summit.
Now go catch your flights, I guess. On that note.
5 minutes, and it will help us to help the group to plan where things could go for the future. Thank you very much. And have a safe trip home.
In the pit of my heart, every day.